Here is something most people have felt at least once. You are given something important to do. Maybe it is a role at work, a responsibility in your family, or a calling you sense but cannot quite name, and instead of moving forward, you stall. You ask for more information. You wait for more clarity. You frame it as caution or humility. But underneath all of that, if you are honest, the real thing driving you is fear. That tension is ancient. It shows up in one of the most famous stories in the Old Testament, a man named Gideon. And the way the text tells his story is not flattering in the way we usually expect from a hero. It is something more honest than that. Let us walk through Judges chapters 6 through 8 together. We are going to move slowly through the key moments, and at the end, there is a practical takeaway that I think will sit with you for a while. First, some background. The book of Judges is structured around a repeating cycle. Israel turns away from God. Hardship follows. They call out for help. God raises up a leader to deliver them. Peace returns. Then the cycle starts again. Gideon arrives in the middle of one of these low points. The Midianites have been raiding Israel for 7 years. Judges 6:1 sets this up plainly. The Israelites were doing what was evil in the sight of God, and God gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. This was not a minor disruption. The raids were systematic and brutal. Every time Israel planted crops, the Midianites and their allies would come in, destroy the harvest, and drive off the livestock. Judges 6.5 describes them as a plague of locusts. The land was stripped bare. The people were starving. They were hiding in caves and mountain strongholds just to survive. By the time we meet Gideon in Judges 6:11, the situation is desperate. The text places him at a winepress. He is threshing wheat there. Now, threshing wheat was normally done on an open hill where the wind could carry away the chaff. A winepress is a pit, a hollow. Gideon is threshing wheat in a pit, hidden away, trying to do the most basic act of survival without being seen by the enemy. The image alone tells you everything about the state of Israel at this moment. People are afraid. People are hiding. Even feeding yourself has become a covert operation. And into this moment, an angel of God shows up and says something that must have felt almost absurd. Judges 6:12. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon's first response is not gratitude. It is not immediate confidence. The text shows that he pushes back. He essentially says, if God is with us, why is all of this happening? Where are the miracles we have heard about from our ancestors? We were told God brought our people out of Egypt, but now it feels like God has abandoned us to Midian. This is Gideon's opening move. And it matters that we hear it clearly. His first response to a divine encounter is to voice a complaint. He is not worshiping. He is not overcome with awe. He is expressing something closer to cynicism, mixed with genuine grief. He does not feel like someone who is about to be used to save a nation. He feels like someone who has been let down. Then God responds. Notice what God does not do here. God does not answer the complaint directly. God does not explain the theological reasons for Israel's suffering. Instead, God pivots. Judges 6:14. Go in this strength of yours and save Israel from the power of Midian. Have I not sent you? And Gideon replies in a way that has been read for centuries as a sign of humility. He says, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. People often read this as a kind of admirable self-awareness. Gideon knows his limitations. He is not overconfident. He is grounded. But the text does not quite let us settle for that reading. Because over the next several chapters, what we see is not a man slowly gaining confidence. What we see is a man who keeps asking for more confirmation even after God has already been remarkably patient. Let us stay in Judges 6 for a moment. After Gideon expresses his reluctance, he asks the divine messenger to stay while he prepares an offering. He comes back with meat and unleavened bread. The angel touches it with a staff and fire rises from the rock and consumes it. Then the angel is gone. Judges 6:21-22, this should be enough. By any standard, this is a clear and powerful confirmation. But Gideon is still afraid. That same night, God tells him to tear down the altar of Baal that belongs to his father and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Gideon does it. But notice the detail in Judges 6:27. He does it at night. Because he was too afraid to do it in the daytime, God says something. Gideon complies. But he does it in the dark because he is afraid of his own family and townspeople. Then the armies of Midian and their allies cross the Jordan and camp together in the valley of Jezreel. The text says in Judges 6:34 that the Spirit of God clothed Gideon and he blew the trumpet to summon the people. Volunteers gather from multiple tribes. Tens of thousands of men are coming, and here is where the story slows down. Here is the turning point. Or rather, the moment just before the turning point. Gideon asks for a sign. Not once, twice. Judges 6:36-40. He places a fleece of wool on the ground and asks God that in the morning the fleece would be wet with dew while the ground around it stays dry. In the morning, the fleece is soaking and Gideon wrings a bowl of water from it. The ground is dry. The sign is given. But then, he does something that is worth sitting with. He immediately asks for the sign again. Reversed, he says, "Let not your anger burn against me. Let me just speak once more. Please let the fleece be dry and the ground around it be wet." He prefaces this second request with an apology. He knows he is pushing it. He knows he is asking for something he has already been given in substance. And yet, he still asks. The text shows that this is not a sophisticated theological test. This is a frightened person using the language of religion to manage the fear of moving forward. God, again, is patient. The second sign is given. The fleece is dry. The ground is wet. Now we enter Judges 7 and the tempo of the story changes. God tells Gideon that the army he has assembled is too large. The text is explicit about the reason in Judges 7:2. God says Israel would boast against me and say their own strength saved them. So a process of reduction begins. First, anyone who is afraid is told they can leave. 22,000 men leave. 10,000 remain. Then God says there are still too many and uses a water drinking test to reduce the number further. Those who lap water like a dog, holding it in their hands, are kept. Those who kneel down to drink are sent home. 300 men remain from an original force of 32,000. This reduction is often read as God showing that small, faithful forces can do more than large, self-reliant ones. That is true. But notice what it also means for Gideon personally. Gideon is already afraid with 32,000 men behind him. Now he has 300. The text does not gloss over this. In Judges 7:9-11, God appears to Gideon at night and tells him to go down and attack the camp. But then God adds something that stands out. God says, "If you are afraid to go down, take your servant Purah and go down to the camp and hear what they are saying, and that will encourage you." God knows. The text is not subtle here. God knows Gideon is still afraid, and God is still working with him. God does not wait for Gideon to reach some threshold of courage before moving the plan forward. God adjusts to where Gideon actually is. Gideon goes down with his servant. They slip into the edge of the enemy camp. They overhear a soldier talking about a dream. A round loaf of barley bread tumbling into the camp, hitting a tent and knocking it flat. The soldier's companion interprets it immediately. This is the sword of Gideon. God has given Midian into his hand. Judges 7:13-14. This is the moment. This is where something shifts. The text says in Judges 7:15 that when Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped. That is the first time in this entire narrative that Gideon worships. Not when the angel appeared to him at the winepress, not when fire consumed his offering from the rock, not after the fleece signs. The moment Gideon worships is when he hears a pagan soldier's dream being interpreted by another pagan soldier in a foreign camp. saying that God was going to deliver Midian into Gideon's hand, something unlocked. Something that all the direct divine encounters had not yet unlocked. We do not know exactly why this particular moment broke through. The text does not explain it, but it is worth noticing. The sign that finally moved Gideon was not the most dramatic one. It was the most grounded one. It was overhearing human fear on the other side. After the worship, Gideon returns to the camp of Israel and says simply, in Judges 7:15, "Get up. God has given the camp of Midian into your hands." What follows is one of the most unusual military strategies in ancient literature. Gideon divides the 300 men into 3 groups. He gives each man a trumpet and an empty jar with a torch inside. His instructions are straightforward. Watch me. Do what I do. When I blow my trumpet, blow yours too and shout, "For God and for Gideon." In the middle of the night, they surround the camp. At Gideon's signal, all 300 men blow their trumpets, smash their jars, hold their torches high and shout. The sound is enormous. The light from 300 torches suddenly appearing in the darkness from 3 directions creates confusion and panic in the camp. The text says in Judges 7:22 that God turned every man's sword against his neighbor, and the enemy fled. Pursuit begins. The Midianite army collapses. There is much more to the story after this. The victory is not entirely clean. There are moments in Judges 8 where Gideon acts with harshness toward towns that refuse to help his men during the pursuit. He destroys the Tower of Penuel and punishes the elders of Succoth. He kills the captured kings Zebah and Zalmunna with his own hand. These are complex moments, and the text does not celebrate them in simple terms. Then there is the episode at the end of Judges 8 where the Israelites ask Gideon to rule over them and to establish a dynasty. Gideon refuses with what sounds like humility. He says God will rule over you, not me. Judges 8:23. But immediately after that refusal, he asks the people for gold from the plunder, melts it down, and makes an ephod, a kind of priestly garment or object. Judges 8:27 says that all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it, and that it became a snare to Gideon and his family. This is how the story ends for Gideon. Not in pure triumph. The man who refused a crown still managed to build something that led people away from God. The same pattern of reaching for some concrete, tangible object to anchor certainty appears here too, just expressed differently than a fleece. The impulse to grasp at something physical to replace simple trust never fully left him. Gideon dies at a good old age in Judges 8:32. He had 70 sons. The text is quiet at that point. But shortly after his death, the people return to Baal worship and forget everything that happened. Judges 8:35 notes that they showed no kindness to the family of Gideon in spite of all the good he had done for Israel. So what do we do with a story like this? Let us slow down and pull out what the text is actually showing us about insecurity and religious language. Gideon's requests for signs were real requests. He was genuinely uncertain. He genuinely wanted confirmation. But the text does not present him as a model of humble inquiry. It presents him as a frightened man who kept the process going longer than necessary. The signs did not actually produce courage in him. The fleece did not make him bold. The fire from the rock did not make him march in the daylight. Even with 300 men assembled, God still had to offer him the option to go eavesdrop on the enemy camp if he was afraid. What this tells us is something important about how God operates in the book of Judges, and in this story specifically. God does not wait for Gideon to become the right kind of person. God works through the person Gideon already is, afraid, reluctant, full of caveats, asking for confirmation even after confirmation has been given. The victory at Jezreel happens not because Gideon finally found his courage in some complete way. It happens because God was patient enough to keep accommodating Gideon's fear until something finally clicked. An overheard dream in a hostile camp. That was the moment. There is something worth sitting with here for anyone who feels unqualified or afraid. If you are waiting to feel ready before you move forward on something you sense is important. The Gideon story does not promise that the readiness will come first. It does not show a man who finally worked through his insecurity and then acted. It shows a man who acted while he was still afraid, with God meeting him exactly where he was, step by unsteady step. Notice also how Gideon framed his fear. He used the language of humility. My clan is the weakest. I am the least in my family. Judges 6:15. These may have been factually accurate statements, but the text shows that they functioned as exit ramps rather than honest assessments. They were ways to delay, ways to frame fear as something more spiritually acceptable. The practical thing the text offers is not a method for overcoming insecurity. It is more of an observation. Insecurity dressed up as humility still leads somewhere. Gideon still threshed that wheat. He still tore down that altar, even at night. He still blew the trumpet. He still led the 300 men to the edge of the camp. None of those steps required him to have resolved his fear. They just required him to take the next step while he still had it. If you are in a place right now where something is being asked of you and you keep circling back to ask for more confirmation, or you keep telling yourself and others that you are just not the right person for this, it is worth asking a quiet question. Is this actually humility? Or is this fear that has learned the right vocabulary? The Gideon story does not shame you for asking. God answered every one of Gideon's requests, but the story is honest that the asking was driven by fear, not wisdom. And the asking never actually resolved the fear. What moved Gideon forward was not a moment of perfect faith. It was a small, unglamorous moment of hearing someone else admit they were afraid of him. Sometimes that is how it works. Not a dramatic breakthrough. Just a small, concrete thing that finally makes the next step feel possible. One more thing before we close. Gideon's story does not end in full redemption. The ephod is a real problem. The harshness in Judges 8 is a real problem. The man does not arrive at some clean, exemplary ending. And yet, the core of what he was called to do, deliver Israel from 7 years of devastating oppression, he did. The 300 men with torches and trumpets in the dark did what 32,000 men had not done. The harvest could grow again. The hiding in caves ended. The text does not need Gideon to be a perfect person for the story to be true, and that is not a small thing. It means that the usefulness of a life to something larger than itself does not depend on that person having first resolved every fear or every flaw. The work still gets done. The people still go home. There is a way to read the Gideon narrative that turns it into a motivational arc. Scared man becomes brave warrior. But the text resists that reading. The scared man remains somewhat scared throughout. He just keeps moving anyway. And what moves him is not his own internal transformation so much as the patient, steady presence of something outside himself that refuses to stop working with him. That is a more honest story. It is less satisfying in the simple sense, but it may be more useful to someone who has been waiting to feel fully ready. The book of Judges is not a book about heroes. It is a book about a recurring human pattern, and about a God who works through that pattern instead of waiting for the pattern to change. Gideon is a chapter in that book. Afraid, asking for signs, using humble language that sometimes functioned as a shield against moving forward. And still, somehow, the torches lit, the jars broke, the enemy fled. The people could eat again. The story does not say you need to become someone different before something good can happen through you. It says something was already happening while you were still hiding in the winepress. If this helps Scripture feel clearer, subscribe to Rincora for calm Bible explainers like this. We move slowly through the text and try to say what it actually shows, not more than that and not less. Here is a question I am genuinely curious about, and I would love to hear your thought in the comments. When you look at moments in your own life where you have asked for more confirmation before moving forward, looking back now, what do you think was actually driving that? Was it wisdom, or was it something closer to what Gideon was doing?